Today, I want to invite you to slow down, just a little, not to look for answers, but to listen to what's quietly present inside you, right now. Pisces experience the world through intuition. You don't need loud signs or clear explanations to sense that something is shifting. Sometimes all it takes is a very small moment, and you realize that familiar current is moving again. On days like this, memories tend to rise. An old image, a feeling you thought had already settled, and somewhere inside, a question appears. One you're not in a hurry to answer. If you're carrying that feeling today, this story may be meant for you, and we'll begin with the very first moment. When an emotion, still without a name, gently touches you, the morning begins just like any other. Light still finds its way through the window in that familiar, quiet manner. Say the world outside continues to move, steady, ordered, unchanged. But inside Pisces, something doesn't feel exactly the same as yesterday. Not a major event, not a clear signal, just a very thin, very gentle layer of emotion, sliding between everyday thoughts. Enough for you to notice, but not enough to put into words. Pisces. Understand this feeling better than most. You don't measure life by what's obvious on the surface. You sense it through subtle vibrations, through small inner shifts, through signals that only those who truly pay attention can feel. When that feeling appears, you don't rush to explain it. You don't try to give it a name. Part of you understands that some things don't need to be analyzed right away to matter. At times, the simple presence of an emotion is enough to begin a quiet conversation with yourself. Pisces carry the ability to reach depths others often overlook. You notice when the atmosphere changes. You notice when your inner rhythm slows or becomes more sensitive than usual. And in that moment, memory may gently stir. Not as a complete story, but like a thin layer of mist, a fleeting image, a familiar feeling, no longer sharp, yet still recognizable to the heart. This doesn't appear to pull you back into the past. Pisces were never meant to live in what has already passed. The experience acts more like a mirror, reflecting the path you've walked, the changes you've lived through, and the depth you've reached within yourself. There are periods in life when strength is necessary just to survive, but at a certain point, sensitivity stops being a weakness. It becomes the language of maturity. When you allow yourself to feel without judgment, when you let emotions pass without holding them too tightly or pushing them away, you begin to realize something essential. Your inner world doesn't need fixing. It needs honest listening. Pisces don't need to rush forward, and they don't need to stop. This moment exists to remind you that the deepest connection always begins within. And from that very delicate point of contact, a new story slowly starts to unfold in the most natural way. This energy doesn't arrive in a way that startles you. It doesn't interrupt your life, and it doesn't demand immediate attention. Its presence feels more like a quiet current, moving beneath the surface, existing alongside your familiar daily rhythm. Everything on the outside continues on schedule. Work carries on. Conversations come and go. Daily responsibilities remain exactly where they've always been. Pisces keeps moving within that world, fully part of it, not separated from it. And yet, on a deeper level, you begin to notice a difference, not through thought, but through a very subtle awareness, as if a calmer inner space is slowly opening within you. In that state, you don't try to grasp anything. You simply observe. You start noticing your reactions to the smallest situations, the way you stay quiet just a little longer, the way you no longer rush to draw conclusions. This isn't passivity. It's a sign of awareness. Pisces carries a unique sensitivity. You sense the rhythm of life before it ever turns into words. You recognize when a new current begins to move, even when there's nothing concrete to point to yet. In moments like these, you're not searching for answers outside yourself. You allow the experience to speak in its own way. You may notice yourself slowing down. You may find yourself paying closer attention to other people's emotions. Or you may simply remain within yourself a little longer than usual. All of this makes sense, because when a new current passes through, the first thing it touches isn't action. It's awareness. Pisces doesn't need to change anything right now. no decisions required, no commitments needed. This space exists so you can sense where you are in your own journey. And when you allow that listening to unfold naturally, you begin to understand something quietly true. Some things only need to be recognized before they slowly become part of the road ahead. As that quiet movement continues to be present, memory begins to find its way back, in its own unique manner, not as a complete story, not as clear images, but through very small, very ordinary details. A song that plays by chance, a familiar scent passing through the air, a phrase you overhear when you weren't paying attention. Moments like these don't ask for a reaction. They simply appear, as if placing a soft pause within a stream of drifting thoughts. For Pisces, memory rarely returns in a straight line. It doesn't replay everything that happened. It carries only a feeling once connected to someone, to a bond, or to the version of yourself from a very different time. You don't need to remember every detail. You don't need to piece together what's missing, because what matters isn't the old story itself, but where you're standing when that memory shows up. Pisces sense this clearly. When memory returns, it doesn't pull you backward. It creates a quiet comparison between who you are now and who you once were. That comparison isn't about judgment. It's like looking back at your own footprints along a long road, not to regret the path, but to notice which stretches you've crossed and how much you've changed. In that moment, the differences become clear. The way you respond is no longer the same. The way you feel carries more maturity. The way you stay with emotion no longer feels rushed. Memory now doesn't carry weight. It becomes evidence that you lived honestly, that you cared, that you opened your heart, that you allowed yourself to feel even when nothing was ever guaranteed. That doesn't make you fragile. It shows you were brave enough to step fully into the experience and grounded enough to step away without losing yourself. Then Pisces don't need to assign meaning to this memory. There's no need to decide where it leads. It's enough to recognize what its presence quietly reflects, that you've reached a place deep enough to look back and steady enough not to be pulled in. On the path of inner growth, some moments aren't meant to change direction. They simply help you adjust how you continue moving forward, and when you allow memory to pass through without holding on, a sense of lightness begins to form, the feeling of someone who has learned to walk alongside the past without letting it define the present. From here, the story gently opens into another layer, where reunions no longer appear in familiar forms, but reflect the transformation taking place within you. Pisces, when the thought of a reunion begins to surface, you may notice it doesn't look the way your imagination once shaped it. Not a familiar setting, not the old words, not even the same roles you once held. The reunion this current of energy points to doesn't follow the pattern of memory. It doesn't repeat what already happened. It reflects change, quiet, yet unmistakable. At times, it's the moment you see someone who once mattered deeply and realize your emotions no longer move along the same path. Not because you forgot, but because you've learned how to stand steadily within yourself. You notice you can look at them without explaining, without expecting, without waiting for anything to unfold next. And in other moments, this reunion doesn't take the shape of anyone outside of you. It appears when you recognize that the way you speak to yourself has shifted, when you listen to your inner world with more respect, when you stop forcing yourself to be strong by old standards and stop blaming yourself for moments of softness. Pisces meet themselves again, not as a more perfect version, but as one who understands their limits, understands their needs, and no longer rejects the deeper emotional layers within. This kind of maturity doesn't come from dramatic moments. It forms through the times you stay with an emotion just a little longer, through the times you choose honesty over avoidance, through the moments you accept that not everything must remain unchanged to hold value. A reunion, in its deepest meaning, isn't a return to an old place. It's the moment you stand in the present and realize you are no longer the same. And that realization doesn't carry loss. Instead, it opens the door to a very quiet kind of freedom. You understand that some connections existed to teach you how to love, some experiences arrived to teach you how to let go, and some reunions only make sense once you've traveled far enough to see them through a different lens. Pisces don't need to know in advance what form this reunion will take. No need to imagine the outcome. No need to define where it leads. It's enough to recognize that when the way you show up changes, every connection, old or new, reflects that shift. And perhaps the most important part of this reunion isn't who you meet, but the feeling you carry as you continue forward. From here, the journey moves into a deeper layer, where you begin to realize you no longer need to hold on the way you once did. There comes a point in the journey of Pisces when you realize you no longer need to hold tightly to anything, not because you've lost desire, and not because you've become indifferent, but because you've begun to understand where a sense of fullness truly comes from. This shift doesn't happen all at once. It forms through small experiences, through moments when you choose listening over reacting, through times when you allow things to unfold in their own rhythm. Pisces were once deeply attached to emotion, not out of weakness, but because you saw meaning in every connection. You believed closeness could heal, and that patience could keep things from slipping away. But over time, you learned a more subtle lesson. Not everything that requires great effort is meant to be carried forward. When you no longer feel the need to hold on, you don't lose your care. You simply place it where it belongs. If a meeting happens, you show up with sincerity. If it doesn't, you continue living fully with what is already present. This state doesn't distance you from the world. On the contrary, it allows you to enter relationships with more ease, more clarity, and more honesty. Pisces begin to see that inner balance doesn't come from controlling circumstances. It comes from releasing expectations. You stop asking where everything is going. You focus instead on where you are, in this moment, with this feeling, as the person you are right now. Some connections once ran very deep. They occupied a large space in your inner world. When you look back, you no longer feel the need to hold on to them at any cost, not because they've lost meaning, but because you've carried their lessons into a more mature chapter of your life. This release doesn't dull your emotions, it refines them. It helps you distinguish between what you truly value and what you once held on to out of habit. Pisces begin to understand that when you're no longer afraid of loss, you step into life with a far greater sense of freedom. You love without binding. You care without demanding. You show up without needing guarantees about what comes next. This isn't giving up. It's trust. Trust that you can face whatever arrives because you've become steady within yourself. This balance isn't a gift from outside. It's the result of many returns inward, many moments of listening to emotion without rejecting it, and many choices of honesty over avoidance. When you no longer need to hold on, and now you begin to notice something very gentle. Life doesn't ask you to cling tightly in order to prove your worth. You are already enough, even as things change, even when nothing needs confirmation. And from this very state, a new level of awareness slowly opens, where you begin to see clearly the changes that have taken place within you without needing to name them. After you learn how to loosen your grip, another phase begins to take shape, not through major events, but through very ordinary moments. This energy doesn't appear to place you in uncomfortable situations. It doesn't ask you to prove anything. Its presence feels like a mirror set quietly in front of you, close enough for you to see yourself more clearly. Pisces begin to notice the difference through very small reactions. Things that once unsettled you no longer pull you as far off center. You find yourself pausing sooner, not out of fear, but because you understand your emotions deserve respect. There were situations that once left you confused, conversations that kept you thinking long after they ended, looks that made you question your own worth. Now, when facing similar moments, you're no longer drawn into the same spiral, not because you've become cold, but because you've learned how to stay with yourself while everything unfolds. Pisces start to realize you no longer react on instinct alone. You observe emotion before letting it take the lead. You allow yourself to pause, even when no one is asking you to. That pause isn't hesitation, it's awareness. In those moments, you also notice how the way you set boundaries has changed. Not through harsh words, not through shutting down, but through a clarity that remains gentle. You know what aligns with you. You know what throws your inner world off balance. And you no longer feel the need to over-explain your choices. This shift doesn't distance you from others. It allows you to show up more honestly. You still care. You still listen. But you no longer trade your peace to maintain connections that no longer resonate. Pisces, understand that boundaries aren't walls. They're outlines that help you know where you stand. As this energy reflects back to you, you begin to see the path you've walked through a different lens, the times you felt lost, the moments you doubted yourself, the periods when you believed you weren't strong enough. Now, all of it appears as necessary preparation for becoming who you are today. No growth happens without leaving a trace. Every change leaves its mark. It's just that not everyone notices right away. Pisces recognize their transformation when old situations no longer trigger old reactions. When you choose listening over pushing back. When you allow yourself to step away from what no longer nourishes your inner world. This isn't a victory, and it isn't an end point. It's a quiet confirmation that you've grown in your own way. This energy doesn't come to hold you in place. It comes to show you that you're ready to move forward with less weight in your heart. And when you realize that, a new question begins to form. Not about what you will receive, but about how you want to live in the chapter ahead. From here, the story moves into a deeper layer, where spiritual lessons no longer come from outer experiences, but from the understanding you've been gathering within. After moving through enough experiences to truly look back at yourself, Pisces begin to touch a very different kind of understanding. One that doesn't come from weighing right and wrong, but from acceptance. You realize that not every connection needs to be closed with a complete explanation. Some things once mattered deeply, some bonds ran strong, but when their role is complete, they don't need new definitions to be honored. This understanding doesn't make you indifferent. On the contrary, it shows that you've grown enough to tell the difference between appreciation and holding on. Pisces once had a tendency to search for answers outside themselves. You listened closely to what others said. You watched how the world responded. You wondered whether you had done enough, whether you had understood correctly. But over time, you begin to realize something profound. Not every question needs to be answered with words. Some things only become clear when you allow yourself to stop searching, when you no longer wait for validation, when you no longer need someone else to prove that the feelings you once carried were meaningful, when you accept that what has already happened has fulfilled its purpose. It is right there that a sense of peace begins to form. Pisces learn that every connection that passes through life leaves a mark. Not every mark needs to be preserved through action. Some exist to remind you that you once opened your heart, that you once felt deeply, and that you once lived with sincerity. That doesn't make you weak, and it reflects your capacity for love, a capacity not everyone is willing to carry fully. When you look back at old connections through this lens, they no longer disturb you. They become part of the journey, placed gently where they belong in memory, not controlling the present, not pulling you backward. Pisces begin to step into new relationships from a very different place. You show up fully, but without the expectations that once drained you. You allow connection to grow from resonance, not from the need to compensate for something missing. You understand that real connection doesn't need to be sustained by excessive effort. It exists when two rhythms meet at the right time, and it fades naturally when the rhythm changes. The spiritual lesson for Pisces isn't about learning to understand others more deeply. That it's about learning to recognize what opens your inner world, what causes it to close, and what helps you feel safe being yourself. When you stop searching for answers outside, you begin to hear your inner voice more clearly, not through complicated reasoning, but through direct feeling. The sense of ease when something fits, the quiet resistance when something no longer aligns. That awareness becomes a new inner compass. No need to display it. No need to prove it to anyone. Just clear enough for you to trust your own choices. And when you stay with this understanding, you're no longer afraid of empty spaces. You're no longer unsettled by things that haven't been named, because you know that it's within those spaces that growth continues to unfold. From here, a final message begins to take shape, gentle, fully formed, and ready to close this journey in the most complete way. If today, in a very ordinary moment, you feel something gently reminding you of a reunion somewhere in the future, allow that feeling to be exactly what it is. There's no need to rush to interpret it, no need to assign it a fixed meaning, and no need to wonder whether you're overthinking. Pisces live through feeling. You understand the world through subtle movements within yourself. And because of that, not every signal needs to become an answer right away. Some only need to be acknowledged. Life doesn't always speak to us through clear events. At times, it sends only a very light suggestion, just enough to catch your attention, but not enough to ask you to change direction yet. And that's completely okay. You don't need to prepare for something that hasn't arrived. You don't need to turn back to re-examine what has already passed. Your present moment, with everything unfolding within it, is already a steady place to stand. Pisces have lived through enough to understand this. What truly belongs to you doesn't need to be held tightly. It finds its way to you when you live in rhythm with yourself, when you show up fully, and when you stop trying to become a different version of yourself just to fit someone else's expectations. If a reunion comes, it will arrive in a way you're able to receive. If it hasn't yet, you still continue living deeply, fully, and connected to life in your own way. Pisces don't need to prove anything to the world. Your inner journey doesn't require external approval. Its value lives in how you've learned to understand yourself, to respect your emotions, and to move forward with honesty. When this video ends, everything may continue just as it normally does. But if you carry with you a small sense of ease, a bit more clarity, or simply the feeling of staying with yourself a little longer than usual, then that is already enough. Because sometimes what we need isn't a grand message, but a gentle reminder that you are moving in your own rhythm. And what is truly meant for Pisces will always find a way to reach you when you're ready to receive it in the most natural way.